Analysing the Wuthering Heights soundtrack can't be done in isolation. For those living under a rock, Wuthering Heights, directed by Emerald Fennell, was 2026's big romantic Valentine's Day movie. Big budget, big crowds, big excitement. It had a build-up that got most people very excited, and it got most people who have read the book to go, really? You're adapting that one? And look, I don't really have anything new to add to that conversation. The controversial and frankly insane choice to cast Jacob Elordi in the role of a dark-skinned man already drew eyes, and Fennell's piss-weak defense of whitewashing a character for whom racial prejudice and trauma is such a pivotal experience did not help matters. But look, these criticisms have been done before, and I'm not really adding anything new by bringing them up again. What I can do is look at the fact that the movie is being made regardless and ask, okay, what could be done here to make this work? The first step, which they tried to do, was to have audiences pretend that the book never existed. The second step is, well, to make the movie good, right? I mean, look, there will always be complaints about the very premise of the film, and fair enough, but the reality is that if the movie is good enough, the praise will drown out the criticisms. And I do think a sense of immersion is always important in film and TV, but it's especially important with period pieces. Wuthering Heights takes place in the late 18th to early 19th century, and the costumes, locations, and sound design particularly all need to be crafted in order to match that sound. Charli XCX would not have been my first choice for making a soundtrack for a Wuthering Heights movie, but I've also got the reader's perspective here. Like, I've read the book like a lot of people, and it's not a fun book. It's a gripping read, for sure, and super interestingly applicable. What is your problem? It's an incredibly gripping read, for sure, and super interestingly applicable to modern day race, gender, and domestic issues, but my prevailing thought was that the best course of action would be for every character to be run over by a train and for the property to start fresh without having to house psychopaths. And unfortunately, there's still a small part of my brain that hears boom clap every time I look at Charli XCX. That's not really her fault, but I doubt I was the only one surprised about her next creative turn. With that said, I thought that Charli's intent seemed pretty genuine, and with all the left turns she's taken throughout her career, it would be silly to not think that she was capable of pulling off this switch up. But is this the most interesting soundtrack that Charli could have pulled off? Are we 100% sure? Charli made a post to her Substack before the soundtrack was released, and one sentence really stuck with me. This collection of songs is an album, and sure, my name's on the credits, but is it a Charli XCX album? I don't even know, nor do I care to find out. Well, the good news is that, yes, I do know whether this is a Charli XCX album, and so should everyone else who listened to this record. Despite what people behind the production of this thing kept saying, I really don't see how Wuthering Heights is that far removed from the rest of Charli's catalogue. Dying for You is a Charli song, Alters is a Charli song, Eyes of the World is a Sky Ferreira song, but considering Sky Ferreira's main credits over the last 7 years come from Charli XCX albums, I think it fits. And to be clear, there's nothing wrong with that. I like Charli XCX albums, I think she's an incredibly talented pop artist with a recognisable sound, but that's kind of my point. No matter how far Charli might have wanted to push herself towards this really dark gothic style, and she does get there with a few tracks, most of these songs are just grandiose synth-pop tracks with classical orchestral overtones. That's not out of nowhere for Charli, she's been making synth-pop her whole career. And for me, there was an instinct to be disappointed with what Charli brought to the table here as a result of my own expectations placed on the record. So this is where I want to pivot a little and hop back a year and a half to the release of Charli's previous and most commercially successful album, Brat. When Brat came out, I said it was mid. Okay, I didn't use those exact words, but I did express a disappointment with it, and looking back, there's some pretty cringy things I can remember saying about the club atmosphere it was supposedly trying to cultivate. I just didn't experience the same love for the record that was potent enough to have a whole Brat summer. I don't know, man, I'm not a clubbing guy. I don't naturally want to go out and dance in the middle of flashing lights with a bunch of people I don't know. But even so, I have been a couple of times, I go to concerts, and Brat just didn't strike me as the soundtrack to boundless hedonism. I mean, okay, maybe there are specific tracks like Bondage or Talk Talk that fit that mold, but on the whole, that was always my takeaway. I knew I was going to do a write-up on this new Charli album, so I decided to go back again and give Brat another listen. Hopefully this time with an open mind and a new perspective now that the record has aged a little. And the thing is, I actually ended up being right mostly, I think. But, there's that key lesson about art that I always seem to fail to take into account. The experience should be different for everyone. While I don't personally get much out of using Brat for partying, I did find on re-listen that I find it incredibly emotionally compelling. Possibly even more open-hearted than How I'm Feeling Now was. And while I don't think Brat is perfect or one of my favourite albums of 2024, I do think it is great. I think Brat is a great album. Finally, after a year and a half, I've caught up with everyone else. So after that, after finally reaching that conclusion, I thought I'd try and do the same thing with Wuthering Heights, right? I resent Wuthering Heights existing as a movie, and I think Charlie having a companion album for a period piece is very strange, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm incapable of finding enjoyment in this record. So I'm trying to get there. Really trying to separate the art from the art. I'm not gonna be a bitter rival. We grew together in the same walls. Nope, it's not happening. Maybe that's part of the very nature of this being a soundtrack. Of course, I can't separate Wuthering Heights the album from Wuthering Heights the movie. They're intrinsically linked together in the same way that I can't separate game soundtracks from my time playing them. But also, it's not like Wuthering Heights really gives you anything else to latch onto. It's not like I like Brat now because I just decided I should enjoy it regardless of it missing the mark on its thesis. I like it because while certain aspects of the record don't speak to me, Brat does a lot of very different things very well, and a lot of those different things that I initially failed to consider really connected with me in retrospect. Wuthering Heights doesn't really have that. It's not really Charlie in this project, it's Charlie playing a role, and maybe this comes back to the Substack piece that she wrote, that this isn't a Charli XCX album. But if her emotional absence is the only thing that makes this not her work, then why should I be invested? It's not as if I'm primed to care about the characters in this work. Like I said, this film feels like a shallow fanfiction piece. Not the biggest movie of the year so far, and maybe the reason that Charlie can't get into character here is because there is no character to get into. How I'm Feeling Now feels like Charlie. Brat feels like Charlie. Wuthering Heights feels like Charlie playing Margot Robbie, playing a Sparks Notes description of Kathy Earnshaw. And, well, you could argue that this isn't Charlie's fault necessarily. That's probably true. She didn't make the movie, she didn't write the book, and holding these things against her is a little silly. But I don't think it's fair to ignore the context either. Charlie knew what she was making this for, and if the soundtrack to Wuthering Heights that is titled Wuthering Heights did not make me feel immersed in the world of Wuthering Heights, then I think a little bit of that experience needs to fall back on her. The reason I think I'm slowly coming back around on Brad is the tunes were always there. Always. There are a couple songs that I'm less impressed with generally, but on the whole, the pop appeal of the record was never my issue. It is Wuthering Heights' issue though. Not that it's trying to have the same kind of pop appeal, obviously, but it also isn't particularly interesting on the orchestral side of things, and outside of the abrasiveness of the opening couple of tracks, it's really not as earth-shattering of a record as I feel like Charlie wanted it to be. That is just my broader view on the kind of grander scheme of things. I still enjoyed this soundtrack for what it was, like I enjoy any Charlie project that isn't Sucker. I thought House was a crazy single and is honestly a super inspired choice to open this record with how dark and unnerving the synths and bass are, and the spoken word sections are especially creepy. I also thought Chains of Love was a cool follow-up. It's a stark contrast to the cramped feeling of House for sure, with its swelling crescendo of strings and really excellent set of vocals from Charlie, especially on that chorus. It was my favourite single when it released, and while I probably have more appreciation for House retrospectively on the track list, I still think that this is a great moment in the album. In terms of the actual album tracks, I mentioned earlier that I didn't really think Dying For You fit in this context, but I still think it's an excellent Charli XCX track that probably could have fit really well on How I'm Feeling Now. It's just got that sort of instantly sticky melody and passionate romantic feeling that makes it a pretty instant hit. And for what it's worth, I think that Toxic Love as the lyrical theme is a pretty perfect match for the source material. I also really enjoyed Alters and Funny Mouth in the final leg of the record. Alters is another pretty beautiful moment where Charlie shows that she's capable of keeping up with the gorgeous orchestral production, and Funny Mouth's chaos and incorporation of this more harsh set of strings, in contrast with the elegance of the rest of the record, is a very powerful moment to end the soundtrack on. And that's probably enough standouts to consider this a good record, and I do consider Wuthering Heights a good record on its own. Not a great one, but still a solid addition to the Charli XCX catalogue. I just can't help that disappointment I feel. Everything about this saga just ended up feeling way less interesting than it could have been. You interpreted one of the most classic and timeless novels of the 19th century. You got one of the most talented and interesting pop stars of the last decade to record a full soundtrack for the movie. But all we got were minor controversies in a movie with mixed reviews, and a C-tier Charlie record isn't going to stop that from happening. I'm not going to disagree with you if you fell in love with this soundtrack. I think there's enough hits there to make that a reasonable response. But I do think the sort of re-evaluation that I had with Brat seems unlikely here. Because through all the hype this movie and soundtrack received, I just didn't connect with it as much as I wanted to. With that said, I do think that this is overall a positive reflection on Charlie, on her willingness to try new ideas, her commitment to following through on those ideas, and her credentials as a multi-talented artist. And even though I didn't love this, I do hope that her next record gets just as much focus, and she can once again prove what else she's capable of.